The next question is about four key challenges when it comes to diversity and inclusion globally. So in the next, I don't know, 5 years. So what are the key challenges?
So one is a lack of understanding of really the conversation we're having, right? What is diversity? What does that even mean? What is inclusion? What does that even look like, right? So continuing to have those conversations for us is really important, to have those conversations really consistently, right? Another is looking at the policies, procedures, and the cultural elements that are really embedded and saying, okay, so where does diversity and inclusion fit in here, right? And looking at those really critically and looking for opportunities to further embed diversity and inclusion. And I think sometimes one of the hard challenges there is when a culture, maybe that's inside a company, right, is really committed to a certain way of doing something because they've always done it that way, right? And they're really committed to this way of doing things. But what if, right, it turns out that that specific way of doing things is in opposition to a more inclusive environment, right? Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that companies then have is, how do we have those challenging conversations, right? Mm-hmm. How do we find the root? How do we figure out how to have conversations about the roots of those things? And figuring out how to either be okay with them and understanding the consequences, or tearing them apart and sort of dealing with what then happens to an organization's culture if something that feels so important and embedded is then dismantled.
Okay, but my impression is that still we are talking about human to human conversation, human to human communication. And now we live in the age of AI, of automation of work. And I can imagine that there is a chance that, for example, some people's work will be automated. And in such a world, is the discussion about diversity and inclusion still valid, still accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It looks different, right?
Uh-huh.
The conversation is always there, will always exist, because people will always control the machines, right? Mm-hmm. So
hopefully
there's right. There's reskilling to be done, right? There will be, and there always has been, right? And I think that that's a piece that's really important for us to remember, is that we're not currently operating on typing machines, right? We don't operate with typewriters. We have moved on from that experience. Now, that doesn't mean that what it means is that the folks who once their lives were ruled by typewriters learned to do something different, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever that was, whether that was then a keyboard on a computer and with a mouse and all of this newfangled stuff, right? Or they learned a new skill and something different. And so I think for each of us who might be looking at a job that might one day be done by a machine is looking at, what does that mean for me? What opportunities does it open up for me, right? Because that's what it really is, right? One of the things that's really powerful about automation is that oftentimes what's being automated are the pieces of our job that are exactly the same every time we do them.
Repetitive,
right.
Boring.
Right. Those are not the pieces of our jobs we really like to do, right? Mm-hmm. We want to spend our days doing the things that are more complex, right? That are more exciting for our brains, right? And so I think there's the real powerful opportunity to say, wow, look at all the stuff I can do now. What can I dive into that's exciting that I really wanted to spend my time on that I couldn't before because I was too busy putting, item A into slot B a million times a day, right? Now I can focus on the exciting thing. But also the diversity conversation around AI is who is building the AI? What are those diverse teams that are building them? Are those inclusive teams? Because what they're creating, whatever AI gets created out of that team is going to be a reflection of that team.
Of course, we are talking about the thing that we create the narrative around AI, and also if AI is biased, it's because of us, because we feed the internet with data.
Absolutely. And so it's really important for those teams to be aware, to be thoughtful, to be thinking about what's down the road, to be thinking and continuing to ask themselves that critical question, what are we missing? Who are we missing? Right? It makes me think of the case where when YouTube came out with their app on a cell phone for the first time, it was something like 10% of users were having this experience where all of their videos were being uploaded upside down and they couldn't figure it out. Well, it turns out that your videos were only uploaded the quote unquote correct way, right? They were only visible right side up if you were right-handed because the team of developers didn't have any left-handed people on it. And so they never figured out that if you were left-handed, you were having a different user experience, right? And so there's always that conversation about who are we missing? Who is left out? Either because they're not in the room or because they don't feel empowered to have their voice heard.
Okay. The last question is linked to our research because yesterday and the day before yesterday we ran a research about how to close a gender gap in general for women in tech, in IT industry. And one of the main findings is that we need to create gender neutral organizations. So there is no division when we talk about men or a woman in the particular role, for example, the role of a developer or programmer. So would you agree with this statement that it's better to not to talk about what is the criteria of division, but we should create this gender neutral, gender blended, I would say, reality?
I think that we need to create space where people can show up authentically and be rewarded for that and that be appreciated. And I think that that's really complex because we have operated for thousands of years in a really different way, right? So for thousands of years, there has been a gender divide and this concept that men have one role and women have other roles, and that those are the only two genders that exist, right? So first, we now have a greater understanding and are more open in discussing that gender is more dynamic than two polar, quote unquote, opposites, right? But we still have these cultures where our thinking around how things are done is embedded in a strong history, right? So how do we create spaces where folks can show up and do their best work, right? I think that what that means is that gender looks different for each of us, right? And the way in which we feel empowered by our gender, or potentially in some societies held back by our gender, is acknowledged and understood, right? So, I don't really see this as, I don't see the ideal as this sort of gray washing of everyone, right? Because I don't think that creates an environment where people feel really valued for being who they are as a person and what they as an individual bring to the table, right? I think that what we need is a space where a woman who feels really empowered by wearing makeup and high heels and dresses and jewelry and false eyelashes gets as much respect and appreciation for her ideas as the man who has always looked like the man who looks and feels empowered by presenting as the man who has always gotten respect for leading the group and standing at the front of the table.
And this guy is wearing flip-flops, for example, but still it's like self-confident enough to contribute to the reality in a different way.
Right.
Okay.
And also the folks who exist outside of that binary, right? So the person who's male and also feels empowered by wearing heels and makeup, right? And by the person who identifies with gender neutral pronouns and has an ambiguous gender presentation or not, maybe, right? That all of those people are valued to the same extent and respected to the same degree.
Okay, it sounds so simple. Like a simple solution. It's like we have a one-line statement, but it's hard to implement it. Okay, the last question is linked to your experience because you are in Poland and you were a guest speaker at Kozminski University. So, what do you think about our students, the way they interact, the way they talk about business? Any first impressions?
Oh, it's been such a pleasure to be here and to see the energy that students have, right? They're so engaged with each other and they definitely displayed a great deal of willingness to explore the concepts, right? And engaging with each other on them and building teams and having really dynamic conversations about building solutions together. We have a good future ahead of us.
Okay. The last question is about Warsaw. So, what do you think about Warsaw as a city, as a lifestyle of people here in Warsaw?
I have spent a lot of time in hotels and conference centers. So this afternoon, my plan is to get out and learn more about the city because I need to check out these mermaids. There are mermaids on everything, and I want to learn more about that.
Okay, thank you.